welcome back to another edition of Inside BBI with John and Eric. I'm John McDevitt, and with me, as always, senior editor of Big Blue Interactive, Mr. Eric Kennedy. And Eric, we won't waste time going back and forth between us right at the moment. We have a guest. It is Jordan Raanan of ESPN, who covers the Giants and has for a very long time. And Jordan, first off, God help you, since you've been covering during one of the most epic amounts of time of just Giants fandom of. Well, we've had 2 winning seasons in the last 10 years, so that's not bad.
So I like to say that I showed up in the middle of 2013. So they were already, I think it was it 0-5 or 0-6, whatever it was.
Oh, yes.
Heading into that classic Monday night game where Josh Freeman apparently played like the worst statistical game of all time. So it wasn't my fault. Like they were already, because my friends like to say they sent me to cover the Giants to make sure they turned to crap. But the reality was, I like to tell them they were already turning to crap. They were I think it was 6.
I think you're. I think you're right on. And yes, they had the game with Josh Freeman, who he made the Tommy Maddox time with the Giants look just spectacular. I mean, I was looking it up.
I was looking it up. It was actually kind of crazy. He was signed like 3 days before the game, and they started him for some reason. Like he didn't know anything that was going on. It was pretty wild. I went back and looked at it recently for some reason.
And then we went on a roll. We won a few games in a row playing teams that were playing like their second or third string quarterback. And people were like, we're back.
They finished 7-10 that year. So that means they won. I mean, 7-9 actually at the time. So it means they won what? They went 7-3 over the last 10 games.
Yeah. Right. We beat a string of teams with just backup quarterback central.
Yes, you did. Yeah. So Tennessee Titans. I remember being in Tennessee for and Jacksonville back to back for like Christmas Eve or something like that.
And Jordan was, like he said, 2013, and that was the first year I met him. It was at training camp because we were giving a trophy to Antrell Roll, who had won our BBI Player of the Year. And who would have thought it? 12 years later, we're still, because that was 2 years removed from the Super Bowl. So we're only 2 years removed from the Super Bowl. Tom Coughlin's still there. Jerry Reese is still there. And, that's just, we're all thinking that's just a blip on the radar. We'll get back to the good old days.
And it was funny because my
12
friends,
years.
I was trying to explain to my friends, like, man, things here are weird. They're messed up. And most of my friends grew up Giants fans. And they were like, you're just hating. They just won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I'm like, man, something's weird. There seemed to be a split, between in the front office. It's like all these weird things. Like even when I remember going to the Senior Bowl, it was like Chris Marrow was sitting with the group on one side and Jerry Reese was sitting on it with another group on the other side. I was just like, what is this normal? Like this was my first time covering a team full time. And I was like, something doesn't seem right. And there's cracks in the infrastructure. I was telling my friends like this behind the scenes, and they're like, nah, you're just hating. And then like little by little, it just kept falling apart. And you're like, no, things really were messed up here,
Well, you just opened that door.
Yeah, you just opened that door.
So I'm gonna jump from 2013 to right now. Then
okay.
We're going to do a lot of different things, but since you opened the door about the way the front office, the way things were then, there has been rumors, there has been talk. So I'm asking your opinion, whether you know it specifically or just your gut feeling, that the front office might be kind of, or at least some in the scouting and the management side might be leaning one way, and you've got some on the coaching staff leaning another on what to do specifically at 3, but definitely at the quarterback position in the draft. Are you feeling or thinking there is a schism between Shane's side, his group side, and Daboll's side?
I haven't heard that there's a schism. Like I'm going to say that now. Do different people have different opinions on different players? I'm sure like that's a normal thing, right? Now, what I have heard, and I said this on my podcast, which was taped at the end of last week, and it's kind of gained a lot of steam this week, was that, word on the street has started to get around that Jackson Dart was Daboll's guy. And so that was definitely something that I've heard. And I just had 2 people actually text me more about that just recently, like right before. And that's how I was a few minutes late. Because somebody finally called me back after I was trying to get him for a week or 2. But so that's something you're definitely hearing more. Now, I haven't heard that Shane and the front office don't like him though. Like that's not what I've heard. but it will be interesting to see how it plays out and if there is a push or pull. But I haven't heard that specifically. But I do say this, like, just because the coach loves someone doesn't mean that there will be people in the front office that might not like that guy, especially in this
Mhm.
draft. There's people are all over the board on these
Right.
quarterbacks. So
Right.
uh in the end, at the end of the day, my understanding is the way it works. They have to talk it out, and John Mara sort of comes in, and people think that John Mara makes these decisions, and maybe he influences them a little bit. He's certainly not coming in there, at least from my understanding of how this organization has worked since I've been there. Is he comes in and makes suggestions, like he asks questions like, "Hey, do we really think this is the right thing to do?" Now, maybe those are weighted and it could sway people one way or the
Right.
other. Because when the owner says like, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to sleep if if Saquon Barkley lands with Philadelphia," that holds a lot of weight, right?
Right.
And that's why we sit here and we talk about it all the time, and it's a discussion that's been going on for years. Of um, Chris Mara says something or Tim McDonald says something, it inherently probably carries more weight than everyone else in the organization. Because deep in the back of your mind, you have to think, well, their ownership. Do I really want to, fight to death about, whatever the topic
Right.
may be with ownership? Like that's natural. So I do think that comes into play. And that's the same thing with, you know, Brian Dable and Joe Shane making a decision, like John Mara's asking them and talking them through it, like logically, okay, what's the best way for us to go about this? Do you think that's right? Are you good? Are you guys both good with us going in this direction? And so I think in the end, that's how that they come to an agreement. So I wouldn't say I've heard there's a total schism, but you have heard rumblings over the past few months about there being some tension between the two sides. So I do think there is something to it. I don't think it's like we're Jalen Milrow or we're Shador Sanders and you're Jackson Dart and we're not, I'm going to resent you if you pick this guy or
Right.
if you, and I don't care about you. We're going to pick this guy. Like I don't think it's at that point, to be honest with you.
And it's pretty normal for a coach and a GM, regardless of the team, to have differences of opinion. So I don't think there's anything abnormal about that. If there is a preference by one side, it's just can they come together and work it out?
It would be a problem, and we'll see how it works out,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens afterwards. It'll be a problem if you draft someone that the head coach doesn't even like.
Right.
Right. Right.
Especially at quarterback.
But just
right.
he might like Jackson Dart better,
Yeah.
but he also might like Shador Sanders or Tyler Shuck, and they might end up with or Gentleman or whatever it may be. I'm just
Right.
Sure.
ripping off random names there. Like he could like them, and he just maybe prefers the other guy. But if it's somebody he's against taking, then that's just the recipe for failure. They're going to be spinning their wheels, and everything will
Sure.
blow up. I mean, I guarantee that it'll come out eventually because there's enough people in the league that talk.
So before digging deeper into the draft, I do want to ask one question very specific to what we were just talking about. Is in your opinion, is there potential though, or potential for some of this loggerhead, so to speak, difference of opinion? Could some of that be tied to the way the season went last year? It became apparent, at least from a fan's perspective, and when you guys were asking a lot of questions, you kind of didn't get a lot of answers from Dable, but it became apparent that Shane was pretty much told he was coming back way before Dayball was. And that when you have that meeting at the end of the year, it's ownership and Shane now meeting with Dayball to say what's the plan, kind of deciding if he's staying. Could that be, or any feeling there that what was a team kind of became, Shane's there, he's back. Dayball had to kind of win his way back, essentially.
I think, yeah, it's a fight for survival. I think that's basically what it is. And the GM has the owner's ear more often, right? I think he's
Right.
if you see Joe Shane at these places, he's always with John Mara. Like, yes, Brian Dable is too, but Brian Dable's busy coaching the team during the season. That's, he's not sitting next. The GM could basically, I don't know if they actually do. I think Joe Shane sits separately, but you could like sit with the owner during the game, right? And you could basically be chirping with the owner during the game. Oh, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Like that's how the operation
Right.
is set up inherently. So, but yeah, no, I certainly think that was the case. And in a way, the front office was saying, hey, we didn't get the most out of the players we gave them. And the coaching side is saying, hey, we didn't get enough from the player side. And so I think that did and does exist to some degree. And that's why what you're talking about, I do believe happened to some degree. Joe Shane was on much stabler ground a few read the tea leaves than Brian
Right.
Dable was, for sure.
Right.
Now, related before we get into the draft too, I just have a follow-up question. What you mentioned earlier, Giants fans are frustrated with the last 12, 13 years, as we were just talking about. So we're all looking for
For a
scapegoats.
Yes.
good reason.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
But everyone wants to find what's the problem? They keep firing coaches, keep firing general managers. So obviously the finger gets pointed at ownership, and the finger gets pointed at ownership, family members who are in prominent positions within the organization. One of them, which you just mentioned. Now, he might be a boogeyman to some, or scapegoat for some people, but you do see him, go to these scouting pro days and these private meetings and so forth, and so Mara seems to get a little defensive when asked about this. Have you picked that up too? I mean, over the years, it seems like when people ask about Chris Mara, he gets a little snippy with that. But maybe that's just me seeing that, or do you get that feeling too?
No, definitely. The one time we asked, I think it was you know, Dan Duggan, Pat Leonard, and myself back to back to back. John definitely, it was a, push the buttons kind of deal.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely think that exists. But I are we talking about Chris?
Chris Mara. Yes.
Or are we talking
Chris.
about Tim?
Well, we can talk.
I did,
Whoever you want to talk. Whoever
okay.
you want to talk about.
Chris went to Ole Miss to go
Right.
watch Jackson Dart.
He was at the Shador Pro Day also, so
Right.
I'm pretty sure he actually went. He hasn't been that involved in recent years. It is a little surprising that he made those trips. Like, some people reached out to me, like, Chris is back in, like, people on the outside that have worked in the organization in the past.
Right.
So they were a little surprised to see him there. Tim is very involved. He's part of the front office structure. Like, he's a big figure in there alongside Dennis Hickey, like, as Joe, and Brandon Brown as Joe Shane's top guys. So, but look, they own the team.
Sure.
Right.
That's the way it's set up. Like, not going anywhere. Like, it is what it is, right? And like I said, John didn't, with the one time we pushed John on it and we started asking, like, do you not think it's a problem? He barked back and said, we don't think it's a problem. So it's hard for me to imagine him suddenly changing his mind on that, right?
Right.
And to be honest with you, there's a lot of big companies, and people have family members working all over these big companies, and that's that's sort of how big business works in our country. So I don't anticipate it changing very much, to be
Right. And
honest
the
with
only
you.
reason I bring it up here is because you mentioned years ago, you noticed that when Jerry Reese was there, they were sitting on one side and the others were sitting on the other side. I just wondered if you've noticed anything like that. I don't get that
No, now
sense.
they seem to be more
Yeah.
aligned. And actually,
Yeah.
and Tim, actually, when I talk to people about Tim, people say good things about Tim. Like, he has a football background. He built up his resume. He sort of worked his way up the organization. Like, people respect him. I do think that, but it still holds weight, just by knowing, like, how many guys, like Dennis Hickey's not going likely and sitting with John Mara and having his ear like Tim
Right.
McDonald does. That's just the way the organization's set up.
Right.
So,
Right.
look, they're not having success, so it's an easy thing to pick on at this point. And I know
Right.
he's sort of become the whipping boy because Chris hasn't been around very much. So,
Right.
that's just like, all right, we got to take our anger out on ownership. They're there.
Right.
They're easy targets at this point, as long
And
when they don't have success. And until they have success, they're going to be easy targets. There's no way around it, I don't think.
Right, and people are just, again, they're looking for an explanation. So it's frustration, and I've fallen victim to it too. So
I think it's more, forget the structure of the front office and the ownership being there. They're in this cycle, and we see it a lot of times with teams that aren't good. You end up in a bad cycle, just spinning in circles and spinning your wheels, and you make one mistake and then you parlay it into another mistake. I feel like it's more that than, the structure of the organization. Like, they just haven't been able to get out of their own way once they started going in the wrong direction.
Right.
And they just never really been able to turn it around and just compound one bad mistake with another, right? We can go over a gazillion things right now,
Well,
dating back to what I just said, to the Saquon decision to draft him originally when they went 3-13, the rolling back Eli, like all those things. And they're still kind of paying for those sins in a way.
Sure.
Right, and in the 2022 season, in hindsight, backfired on them because that caused them to make
Oh,
contract
for sure.
decisions, and if they had to go back in time and have a do-overs, they certainly wouldn't have handled that offseason the way they did too.
Yeah,
So,
Joe Shane has admitted that. Like, trust me, he knew that they weren't that good in 2022.
hmm
You know, that I had those conversations. Like, he knew at the time that it was a flawed team and they weren't that good, but like everything was going right. And like I remember they even had. You remember who their middle linebacker was in the second half of that season?
oh, it was
It wasn't Tay Crowder at
Jay
that point, was it?
Crowder, and oh no, it was the guy that they picked up.
No,
It
it
was the
was
guy from the
the Dallas
Cowboys.
guy, the
It was the
Smith.
Dallas
Smith.
guy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like
Yes.
their middle linebacker was
Jalen Smith.
Jalen Smith
Jalen
With
Smith.
one knee.
Yeah,
with
One.
one knee,
yeah,
who was a shell of the player he once was before he suffered that injury,
yeah.
and but like that's what the team was at the time. Like they had no receiver, like they
Right.
knew where they were at, but they just,
Right.
it's like, what, maybe we are closer than we thought we were. Like they had this plan to basically rebuild it from scratch at that point, and they just got away from it.
Well, the other frustration too is that if you looked at Hard Knocks, it looks like this team is basically able to judge quarterbacks because they looked at Jaden Daniels and you saw it. We trade up for Jaden Daniels. They try to trade up for May. They seem to be able to, on the surface, to evaluate quarterbacks, except they couldn't evaluate Daniel Jones when they had him for a full year. And again, I know it would have been a difficult decision for them to have gotten rid of him after the playoff season, but they seem to have made obviously a bad decision in evaluating him. So that's where some of this frustration is coming to. And some people are very worried about their ability to analyze quarterbacks in the upcoming draft. But again, if you look at the Hard Knock stuff, it looks like they can, but it's the Daniel Jones situation that seems to cloud the situation.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to find out because, like,
Yeah.
Jaden Daniels was, a very highly rated prospect.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like, they say their process is great and it's shown great results, but like, until you draft somebody
Yeah.
that works, like, really, like, what does it mean if you don't have one of those guys, right? Great. You're able to scout and evaluate all these guys, but you don't have any of them. Okay. Like, at some point, it's got to produce. And until it produces, on their resume is they re-signed Daniel Jones. They didn't
Right.
get the most out of Drew Lock. That didn't work. Tyrod Taylor didn't want to stay, right? They ticked him off by playing Tommy DeVito over him at some point. Like, like their quarterback record right now for the Giants, it's not good.
It's not good. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, they're going to have to produce a quarterback. I think they'll try and get one this year. I'm convinced they will. I don't know if it's the best idea in the world. Like, in a perfect world, you'd probably be like, this isn't the greatest quarterback draft. Probably best to collect as much draft capital as possible, but they're not really in position to do that. And I don't blame them for taking a shot at a quarterback given the situation they're in right now.
So sticking with the draft, and let's move there. And 3 seems to be somewhat of, I don't want to say a lock, but it certainly looks like, depending on which of these 2 guys is there, that the Giants really like Hunter, they like Carter. If it's kind of almost whichever one of the 2 top players in the draft falls to them, that seems to be where they're going. But again, there's always whispers, though, that the Giants could still go Sanders. I can't imagine a draft where you would take Sanders over a Carter or a Hunter. But then again, I can't imagine that we would be going where we are right now. What do you think on those 2 guys specifically in the Giants' interest in them? And is there any chance, because you did bring up, and there was some talk that they could move down. Peter Schrager brought that up. You had mentioned that too. Are they pretty much locked in on one of those 2 guys, in your opinion?
I think it will be very hard for them to move off one of those 2 guys. Those are very highly rated prospects. I mean, I know teams that have Abdul Carter as a top ranked player in the draft, right? Travis Hunter, similarly, right? People are super high on Travis Hunter. I talked to a general manager recently from another team, and he's like, they're clearly the top 2 players in this draft. So if that's the case, and Joe Shane's going to say value, and now you don't pass on those type of blue chip or what was it? Or generational players was the phrase that was used.
Right.
I hate that term. It's very overused.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
Travis Hunter, I can get, because if he is able to do that and play both sides, that's generational, because we have not seen that in our life.
Right.
Really.
Right.
Full time in the NFL. Like, or even close to that. Like, really, we haven't. Like, maybe you guys are older than me, but like, so I wasn't
Probably.
around for Chuck Bednarik and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hey, how old do you think we are?
Wait
Yeah,
a
I'm
minute.
kidding.
You said a little bit,
I'm
but Jesus, we went way.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah. None of us have been around for like
Yeah.
those kind of guys. So it would be generational to me. So I do think they're going to go in that direction now. You hear all kinds of crazy stuff at the draft, and someone was just trying to tell me, like, yeah, maybe they take Dart at 3, blah blah blah.
Oh
Maybe they
gosh.
trade back and take Dart, and like these are the kind of things you hear. I'm not saying I don't believe that,
Right.
by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way they're going to go. I think it's more likely we take one of these two guys, right? They need to win games first. Okay, that's a priority.
Right.
They need to take a quarterback in order to say we have our potential quarterback of the future on the roster. Right? These guys, everyone's in a way self-preservation, right? You have to be. And I don't blame them. You're not going to just get yourself fired and say, hey, we're just going to put off the quarterback position until next year. We'll build a roster. We'll have a tough year this year and get to next year. No, they won't have a job anymore, right?
Right. Right.
There's just no scenario there where they would have a job unless you win 8, 9, 10 games, probably, right? Or a
Right.
lot of games, whatever it may be. So the likelihood to me is that there will be a quarterback, whether it be at 34, trading up in the back half of the first round, whatever it is on day 2, that they will get a quarterback. And they could say, hey, look, we have a quarterback, of the potential quarterback of the future here. We just spent a year developing that quarterback. Like, do we really want to change it up now? We're building something here. Like this guy could be it. He's not going to play much, if at all, this year. And you say, and that's the scenario for them that makes the most sense. So I've landed in that zone, and nothing I've heard has told me otherwise.
That makes me wonder then, okay, let's say it's Carter.
Mhm.
First off, real quick, have you heard anything from people around the league of concerns about the foot, about the shoulder? Or is it pretty much everybody's kind of like the medicals have come back and they're pretty good with what they've heard?
I haven't heard much about the medicals. The medicals to me haven't been anything that's said. Now, there's other things about Carter you may hear, some things in his past, or, his interview might not have been great. Like, I've heard little bits and pieces like that. Like, these are the kind of things that come up before the draft, but
Right.
not anything where I think that it would prevent a team from drafting a guy. And also, let's be fair. You had a little PSTD when you're the Giants. You
With
didn't. You
Parsons.
took Micah Parsons off the
Yeah.
board.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You somehow were good on Kadarius Toney, but you weren't good on Micah Parsons. I mean, what a disaster that was. Like, at some point, you're gonna be like, well, okay, it might not be the cleanest prospect of all time, but he's a hell of a player. He's a super talented player. We need super talented players. I have a friend in another organization who used this line for me once. It always stuck with me. It's like, and I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but like, you need some questionable guy. Like, not everyone's going to be a perfect
Choir boy.
talent or prospect or perfectly clean prospect with not like absolutely perfect, right? And your job is to take those guys and make it work on your team. Like, every team has to have some questionable characters. I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that he is a questionable character.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
I haven't heard to that degree there have been little concerns that have popped up over the last few weeks of people. When I say to people, hey, what do you think of Abdul Carter? So, like, it's, I'll read you something I just got back, like, not too long ago. Piece. It's like, 3-down starter, game changing ability. I had one before that said comparable to Von Miller, right? Like, these are some of the things you get. And then another guy's, was his interview wasn't great. We weren't blown away. It was more like, he didn't know too much about his team scheme, but he just went out and wrecked the game. Like,
Right.
okay, so
That sounds
all
like
right.
LT.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, yeah, and that, like, nothing that I would say would take him off the board. I mean, you hear some little things here or there. It's not the cleanest prospect probably in the world, but not with the injuries. Back to the original question.
Okay.
Right.
So then with that in mind, if the Giants take Carter at 3, and now you're trying to maneuver around, Is there any chance, or have you heard any scuttle that the Giants might be willing to move Kayvon, knowing that they still got to pick up the 5th-year option, and that's kind of a tradable piece if they needed to, if it's to get that quarterback. You are weakening one spot, although you're bringing a guy in, but if that's going to help you and keep some draft picks, have you heard anything about them being willing to move him, or his name come up at all in that kind of realm?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything that I believe or that's serious at this point. Like there's people that speculate that, like just like you see
Right.
all over social media, but I haven't heard anything concrete about that. I think just based off reading the clues and the context of what I'm hearing is that their goal, their idea, if you get Abdul Carter, would be to build a super strong pass rush. And that's a
Yeah.
strong, deep pass rush. It would seem to be counterproductive to then trade
Right.
Kayvon Thibodeau.
Right.
Like that's
Right.
the whole goal, is to make that your strength. And I think in a way, especially early on, Abdul Carter's the guy who did play. He played linebacker the first 2 years at Penn
Right.
State. He
Right.
didn't play edge rusher. You
Right.
could find some ways to get him in certain packages in other spots, I think, as well. So I think it would work with the 3 of them or the 4 of them if you're what's Chauncey's last name? Is it Golden?
Oh, Golston.
Golson. Yeah.
Golston.
Yeah.
Golston.
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't Golden.
Right.
Chauncey Golden, to make it work with all those guys, like that's been the Giants' way for years, right?
Right.
At least
Yeah.
during that 2007 and 11 run, it was have just an endless run of pass rushers. Now, I don't know who could play the Justin Tuck role. I'm not sure any of these guys are natural, like interior
Right.
rushers, but
Right.
I do think that Abdul Carter's ability to play as a linebacker, maybe they could have some packages, and he moves really well. Like you could almost use him
Sure.
as a straight linebacker and have him basically blitz 70% of the times, but there's still 30% in the middle of the field where you could trust him to go back. He's that freakish an athlete.
Right.
Would
And
be
John
nice.
Schmelk was on with us a couple of days ago, and he was basically saying if each of those guys gets roughly 60 to 70% of the snaps, somebody's going to be off the field. The only thing that John and I were talking about with that, our slight concern is that when Kayvon's contract does come up, even if they do renew the 5th-year option, they're going to have to come up with, can they pay 3 edge rushers the kind of money that, Kayvon's probably going to be looking for big bucks when his contract comes up. And do
Let
the
him
Giants,
produce first, and that's
Yeah.
a problem you worry
agreed.
about later.
yeah. So,
You
but the
know?
question is do you want to get to another situation like a Saquon and a Xavier McKinney where he may walk without you getting anything in return? And so therefore, maybe if you do get an offer for him in this draft, that I'm only just spitballing here. It's the only thing I could see. I agree with you. It would be nice to keep the 3 of them. The only thing I wonder about is the contract. It seems like that's a long ways off, but these things come up faster than you realize too.
Yeah, I just think, look, let's see him prove it. He didn't have a great year last year.
Yeah,
Like
Right.
his value is probably not at its highest right now.
that's true.
Doesn't seem like it would be a smart move to do that now. See where it stands maybe after this year.
Okay.
It seems like
if you go Abdul Carter, obviously, that's what we're talking about.
right. So it seems a foregone conclusion. They're going to pick the 5th year up more than likely with Kayvon. It seems a foregone conclusion they're not going to do that with Evan Neal. Tea leaves kind of what they are. You would agree that that's the case as well.
Yeah, it's not a decision that you officially have to make until I think the date is the first week of May.
Yeah, I think it's like you're right around there.
So you really don't make that decision beforehand, and you see what happens. What if he tears his Achilles in the next 2 weeks? So like and obviously we don't want that to happen. Nobody wants that to happen, but that's the reality. Like, why would you make that decision before you have to and guarantee anybody the money? So I think we sit here and wait, but I think the likely outcome, and this is not sourced or knowledge, aside from just having conversations with them and knowing what they think of them, is that Thibodeau probably will be picked up and Neal won't be picked up. Like you said.
Have you gotten any, did anything register with you when, I know each week you meet with the position coaches during the season, and I think they have a meeting coming up this spring too, where you're going to be able to meet, interview the position coaches. Have you gotten anything on what is going on with Neal in terms of why he hasn't developed? Obviously, injuries have been a big part of that, but it's a real head scratcher. And I know it happens in every draft. There's always busts, but it just seems like this isn't another Eric Flowers situation where the guy, that there was an attitude issue there. I mean, have you picked up anything from the position coaches or anybody? What's going on with Evan?
Now, a lot of it is injuries, I think. That
Hmm.
was a big part of it. And also, look, I think there was a misevaluation to some degree.
Hmm.
Like the questions about Evan Neal, let's not pretend he was a perfect prospect,
Right.
or that he's top heavy and he doesn't move great for a tackle, right? Well, what's been his biggest problems in the NFL? He's top heavy and he doesn't move
Right.
great as a tackle. And then on top of that, he's been injured. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not sure they've been thrilled with some of the things about how he's gone about his work over
Hmm.
the past couple of years, but it's nothing where I think that they're like, oh, this guy is a dog, or he's completely alienated from the rest of the offensive line, like Eric Flowers was. Like,
Right.
I don't see it to that degree at
Okay.
all, but it'll be definitely something to watch moving forward of how they deal with him here. Of all right, one last shot here to see what we can make at guard.
Right.
And if that doesn't work, like it might be best for everyone. And Evan Neal is somewhere else, right? For him and the team. Like if we get anything for him,
Right.
by the end of the summer, and he's not, he's okay. He's an uh, serviceable at best backup guard. Like
Right.
what good does that do for anybody?
Right. Right.
And they've been less than enthusiastic about that move. Like we've talked to him, we're thinking about it, he's willing, he'll do whatever, but not like, yeah, we definitely think he's got a future at guard. We're gonna move him, we're gonna get him. They don't really come out and it's really basically kind of the way you just described it. It's really more like, well, I don't know. We'll see what
No,
happens.
this decision was made a while ago. I put a line in, I think, around the combine in a story like Evan Neal's going to play guard. Like
Mm.
it was decided that they were going to try him at guard. They didn't relay it to him, I don't think, until they just got in. So it might have been like recently, like they sat down with him maybe this week, if they even did it yet, and really like laid it out to him. But it seemed like that was going to be the plan of okay, we're going to try guard here. Maybe you'll still play some tackle, as an option,
Right.
but we're at least going to try you at guard and see what we have here. And
So you,
look, you would think his skill set is probably better suited to guard, and
right.
Right.
should have
Right.
probably tried it last year.
So you did hear in advance of everybody else that he was moving to guard, because I do remember you saying that.
Yeah, I put a line in the story, and sometimes you got to read the tea leaves. It didn't just like
Mhm.
didn't like fall into the story, like
Right.
I had heard it,
Yeah.
and it was, and I didn't exactly specifically source it to his person or something, but it was definitely educated opinion there,
Right.
like
Gotcha.
that, those kind of
Gotcha.
things. Like that, a lot of times that's kind of how you have to work. Like there's a lot of like I throw like little lines of things, especially in my podcast, a lot of times that, hey, if you read between the lines, like, oh, okay,
Right. Right.
you know, and
Right.
that was one of them.
Okay.
So, all right. So we've talked. We're assuming Carter Hunter. I'm gonna for now, for giggles purposes, Carter. The draft is rolling through, and it could go in a number of different directions. There's a lot of talk that the quarterbacks are not loved by a lot of the league as far as top level quarterbacks. So we could see maybe two go in the first round. Others have said maybe four. I kind of have a weird feeling it's going to be a few at the bottom. If that's the case, and if the Giants are, you've already said that there's talk that Dayball's interested in Dart. Where does the from Sanders, all the attention the Giants gave to Sanders, what's your thoughts on that whole thing? Was that smoke per se, or were they really as interested as they certainly made it appear from the fall all the way through to just recently?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's something I can't get out of my mind. Like, and I had somebody tell me, and I said this in a podcast, I guess right before the owners' meetings. Like, I heard they don't love Shador, right? And then the more you hear this was like, the owners' meeting, so almost like a month ago.
Right.
And so I heard that, and I knew where it came from specifically, and I was like, you know what? I spoke to someone else, and they kind of had heard the same thing. in a similar way. And I was like, okay, they don't seem like they're in love with him. But at the same time, I always go back to the point of you're not spending that much time during the season looking at him if you don't have any interest in him,
Right.
right? Like, so to me, there is some degree of interest. And I remember, now we talk again about front office and coaching. When you're scouting during the season, that's front office, that's the scouting staff, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's that side. The coaching staff doesn't get involved
For sure.
until later on. So it would lead me to think that's what, which is why, like, man, it seems like they like Dart better and Dable, they like Start, but at the same time, is the scouting staff obviously thinks pretty highly of Shador Sanders to the point that they spent all that time on him during the season.
Right.
They had Dable go to the Shrine Bowl, remember, to meet him,
Right.
right? Like all these things, like it just sticks in the back of my mind. Hey, I can't just fully believe that they're totally out on him, and they're just like, no, we wouldn't touch this guy. Like that's the one thing, that and the way the 2019 draft played out. Remember, you're like, oh, they're gonna take Daniel Jones with the second pick, and then I kind of agree with the philosophy, and I know a lot of people probably disagree with this. But if you're going to take a guy and you're investing in a guy and you
Right.
think he's the guy, just go get him, and you
Mhm.
live or
Right.
die with that guy. And ultimately, they died, and Dave Gettleman ended up without a job. But if he's their guy, just go take him at 3 in here also. Like,
Right.
if you love a guy that much, now if you don't love any of them that much, sure, we're okay with the 2 or 3 different guys in the back half of the round. Then you definitely don't go take him, right? But if you
Right.
thought he was that slam dunk prospect, that was the guy, which I believe they thought Cam Ward could be that guy, like, you go get him. But I don't think they feel that way about any of them. But doesn't mean I feel like they're totally out and they don't like Shador Sanders. I just can't get away from the fact that they spent that much time in the spring and not the spring, during the season, in
During
the
the season.
fall,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
during the season, on him. And that meeting, like, what did they went to a meeting with John Mara and didn't present a plan that had a quarterback?
Right.
They're talking about the Friday before the season
Right.
ended.
Right.
Like, they had to give him something, right?
Right.
Like, we think Shador Sanders and uh, Cam Ward are guys that we can win with here. Like, I
Right.
feel like they had to say that. Now they're kind of waffling at this point, but I don't think they're totally out on him.
Well, you make a really good point too, because people have countered previously about, well, the Giants had all this interest in JJ McCarthy, and even McCarthy was convinced the Giants were really hot on him. The big difference there is what you said, is the Giants were heavily scouting Shador, multiple visits, I think 8 in all or whatever, out to Colorado during the season. The McCarthy talk started afterwards, during this process, during the spring. So that's the big difference, was we weren't hearing about the Giants. Whoa, they're really interested in McCarthy. They're there during the season. And obviously there's scouts out there all the time, but not these big entourages and Brandon Brown being out there all the time. So I agree with you. And the difference is exactly what you said. It was consistent, and it was during the collegiate season when the front office people were the ones, or the personnel department people were the ones that were out
I
there.
I also don't think the JJ McCarthy thing was total smoke, by the way.
Mhm. Oh,
Like, I know that there was like, because remember, there's only a certain number of people, like, in the real tight inner circle, that really know, like, what
right,
Sure.
direction they're going to go at especially that position. And that, on the scouting side, even entering draft day, there was somebody who was like, I don't know, they thought pretty highly of him enough where they were like, I don't know, we could end up taking him. Like,
Hmm.
there was somebody in that scouting department that thought that, like,
Right,
going into draft day. And mysteriously, we didn't hear a single word about JJ McCarthy in the Hard Knocks. Nothing.
Right.
right,
Right.
And to
right,
me, that's like, we know they at least discussed it, like, to some degree, right? That had
right,
to be a conversation they had, and we heard nothing on it.
right,
So I think that they were closer to, wanting to take, or liking JJ McCarthy and taking JJ McCarthy, than people realize. Not that they came to draft day and were going to take him. I mean, I thought they were going to take Neighbors, and they did take Neighbors. But I do think they like JJ McCarthy a lot more than it seems like. It seemed like from the Hard Knocks.
right. And John and I had speculated in Hard Knocks when they had that sit down scene where ownership was in the office. and Shane was going through the first round and what they had hoped. Conspicuously absent were the other three quarterbacks that went afterwards. They weren't even on the screen. So we've thought that they go back and sort of edit that out or something, because it seems awfully odd that none of the other quarterbacks were even mentioned in that list that they had, like, and again, there were like 15 players there, I think.
Yeah,
So,
you probably don't want it out there that you're
yeah.
like saying, you're knocking the guy and saying we're passing on him.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot easier to say, well,
We
we
love
love
neighbors.
Jaden Daniels. He's
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if that was the Giants' decision, probably more even Hard Knocks of,
Right.
agreeing not to put,
Show.
yeah, show them, like, basically degrading those guys, or,
Right. Right.
throwing dirt on them after they pass them. So, yeah, I don't think, look, I don't think that, obviously they didn't like him enough to draft him, but I don't
Right.
think it's like they didn't like JJ McCarthy.
Right.
I totally disagree with that.
So you're going to be very surprised, it sounds like, if the Giants don't come out with a quarterback in day one or day two. That's what I'm hearing from you. You'd be surprised.
I would be surprised. John Mara said the number one priority this offseason was to find the quarterback of the future. I feel like you at least got to take a shot at one,
Mm-hmm.
knowing, like, especially the position that they've been in. I would be surprised if they didn't. I mean, think about it. The thing, let's go over real quick their moves at quarterback. They made a run at Matthew Stafford. They
Mm-hmm.
made a run at Aaron Rodgers,
Rodgers. Yeah.
right? They went in, they were, they, I don't want to say made a run, but they certainly wanted to make a trade up for Cam Ward. That was something that would have
Yep.
definitely interested them. Like, I don't know how far that actually went. I don't think it got very far. Again, kind of like last year.
Right.
Uh, but then they went and they signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Like, they're not out here not trying to do something at quarterback, right?
Right.
They know they
Right.
have to bring their boss something. And so I think that's going to involve a quarterback that they could say, hey, this guy is our quarterback, potentially our quarterback of the future at the very least. And, a big reason Mike Kafka, I think, is there. Mike Kafka was credited pretty much with being the guy who did the quarterback development program with Patrick Mahomes. That was a
Mm.
big part of what he did there. So I think a lot of people have said to me, you know what, Kafka could be a big asset to them there with that, because of spending the year developing this quarterback, basically be his, like, number one job. And so that is an intriguing part of it as well.
Which would be nice, since Kafka so far has been more like a hostage. They haven't let him do anything. They won't let him go anywhere. They've like,
Won't let him
you,
call plays anymore.
you take the play calling away, and the poor guy's just like, nah, I'm still here. I'm like, curious. This is my opinion. So I'm just curious on your thought. Is it possible that part of the divide on I like this quarterback per se more than I like that one might be tied to, I don't know, job security, in that I bring Shador on and we struggle because we've got two vet quarterbacks that are going to start. Those guys are going to start. We struggle. We're not winning games. Man, Shador's dad might be looking for a job next year. And where would he want to come more than anywhere but where his son is already the quarterback? If I'm Dayball, that's just one more thing I'm bringing into the building. Is it crazy to think that he might consider that?
I think naturally you have to at least think about it, but you also have to realize, if I don't do a good job and we don't win, I'm out of a job anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, does it really matter if the guy that replaces me is his dad or somebody else? Like, just worry
True.
about, and I think he's pretty good at that, of, like, saying, I just got to worry about my job here, winning and doing the best job I can, and everything will kind of take care of themselves. You can't sit there and think about all these scenarios like that. Now, inherently, these things are all in the back of their head. They're human beings. It's natural, right? Who
Right.
wouldn't think of these things?
Right.
So
Right.
I think it's all there. It's like, in the back of their head, they're also thinking, hey, I got to worry about my job.
Right.
Like, Connor Hughes reported last year that Dable said to somebody, I'm coaching for my job. That was last year. He went
Right.
3-14. You think he doesn't think that this year?
Right, right.
So
Have you noticed any change in his demeanor over the course of the last 3 years? I mean, have you, I know there's been the weight loss that people have talked about, but have you, when you see him every day practically during the season, is he the same guy he's been personality wise, or has he changed at all? Does he
I think
seem
he's gotten even more guarded
mm-hmm.
since he came. Like I think to a degree for sure. You know, when hoop hits the fan, you
right,
kind of
right.
see what it could turn into, and I think he's found that out the last 2 years, and so I do think he's more guarded, and he looked at times this past year like he knew he thought he was on the way out. And I
Right,
really,
right.
I
I'm glad
really
you said
do
that because I
think
thought
that.
that too. I thought until John's going to kill me here, until the Colts game,
Oh,
I
good
thought
God.
his body language showed that he knew he was gone. And
Yeah.
then everything seemed to change after that game in terms of there was a vibe. And I think it was Dan. We spoke to Dan at the time, and Dan Duggan said the same thing. It seemed like there was a vibe change around that same time. He just seemed, so I'm glad you said this. I seemed to pick that up, but I wasn't in the room with them. He just seemed very like he knew he was
He
toast
seemed defeated.
up to
Yeah.
that point.
No, I totally agree with that assessment. I felt that, and nothing I've heard actually deters me from thinking that was the case. By the way, like
Mm,
Yeah.
it really felt like that. Like, or at least I don't that he thought that hey, he was in big trouble,
hmm
Yeah. So I'm
and
gonna
ultimately he's back though.
Yeah.
so I'm gonna we could go draft, and I also don't want to take up a ton of your
Yeah.
time, but I want to talk some other things with you. But I do have one question. I don't know that anybody really comes out and asks this or asks you guys this question. So I want to ask, um, how much weight, how much sway does Brandon Brown bring to the situation? He spent a lot of time out in Colorado. He's done some other things. Where does he fit in terms of influence within the organization? Obviously, Shane's the guy, but how much is Brown kind of? They seem to be using him a lot, and is this just a stepping stone to somewhere else, or does he have a little more sway here, and maybe he has long-term potential here within the organization?
It's hard to tell on these things, right?
Mm.
It's Joe Shane and Brian Dable's operation. I haven't heard anything that would say that anybody else has like major say, right? I think Brandon Brown, Dennis Hickey, Tim McDonald, Chris Rossetti. That's like Joe Shane's inner circle. Like those
Mhm.
four guys, I think, are very well respected by him, and their opinion matters. But ultimately, and Joe Shane said this in his pre-draft press conference, he's the GM, and the decision comes down to him. And
Yeah.
him and Dable were very tightly aligned. They came in together for the first 3 years at least. Who knows where it's at now? But they were making the decisions together, and they were the ones running the show, and everyone else just gave input. That's my impression. At least it's hard to really tell.
Right,
Like
right.
I can't gauge who Joe Shane maybe holds, opinion and more weight for Brandon Brown compared to Dennis Hickey is an underrated guy in the organization. Joe Shane has a lot of respect for Dennis Hickey.
All right.
Okay.
He certainly mentions his name a lot. So yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I view all those guys in the same realm, to be honest
Right.
with you.
Right.
Okay.
Those three guys being, the top confidants to Joe Shane.
Do you
Uh,
have any professional curiosity now with the quarterback switch? So Daniel Jones was there for 6 years, and Russell Wilson comes in, very different personality. Are you curious just on a personal level to see what the vibe is going to be in the locker room after a win, after a loss, just the change? Because he just seems like a much different guy than Daniel was.
Yeah. I'm interested just to see how much an effect it has on everybody else. The Giants insist the roster is much better than we all think. They just need a quarterback. Heck, they had they didn't change a single starter on
Yeah, no,
offense.
they didn't,
This is
except
yeah.
the,
quarterback. Yeah.
the 31st ranked offense. Okay. You want to blame it all on Daniel Jones. Let's see if he was the problem.
Right.
I think it's kind of where we're at. They're not
Yep.
going to like all of a sudden add yes, they're adding good players in the draft. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to have a totally different offense,
No.
right? Their offense is going to look very even if they draft Travis Hunter 3rd overall, like he's going to be like, an offensive weapon that they add to the mix, but he's not going to play 100% of the snaps of year one,
Right.
probably,
Right.
and so it's going to be much of the same guy. So I'm very curious to see, okay, let's see if it makes how much, I think it'll make a difference, but let's see if it really makes that much of a difference.
Right.
To give some credit to the guy who did it, you probably already saw it, but Kyle Brandt, Good Morning Football, did this little match
I
of.
saw it.
So, what did you think? I mean, if there's one thing you could easily say about Russell Wilson versus a Daniel Jones versus a number of other quarterbacks, he is a very polished package. He knows what to say. It's very consistent. It does sound a little canned and rehearsed. You're just replacing
Totally.
the team and the players.
He basically reads a list of the roster as
Yes.
he's and says this guy's a star. This guy. It's like, here's the roster. Let's see how many guys. It's like a competition of how many guys I can list off on the roster. So it's very funny, and so like I'm interested to see how it plays in the locker room long term. Like, sure, he's proven player in the league. He has a certain level of respect for that alone, right? Dude's
Right.
won a Super Bowl. He was a really good player. He's accomplished a lot of stuff in this league. So to some degree, he has that cachet. That's not
Right.
going to change. But
Right.
it is interesting to see how his personality plays, because it hasn't played that well in some of the previous stops.
Right.
And I had someone in one of his previous stops who I was talking to, and he told me, here's what you're going to see. You're going to see Russell Wilson going. He's going to show up. It's going to be all over social media. He's going to be in San Diego. He's going to be working out with guys. He's going to be working out with a Giants helmet on. And, he's going to invite them all out. He's going to show up late because that's kind of what he does. He's kind of a little bit quirky and self-involved. Like, and that's going to be exactly what you see this offseason. That's exactly what we've seen the last couple of weeks. The only thing is he didn't wear the Giant helmet. I was a little disappointed. Where was the Giant helmet in the middle of workouts? I was told he was going to wear a Giant helmet. So it is interesting to see how that ultimately plays, because it does to me seem a little contrived, but I think it'll work because he at least has a resume of success.
Sure.
Right.
And so you have to respect that to some degree, right? These guys haven't accomplished anything, pretty much the entire roster. There's very few guys have accomplished anything near where Russell Wilson has. So I think you have to respect that to a degree. I'm interested in seeing how much of an effect that has on everybody else.
So with that, let's play a different kind of game. I'm going to throw some things out there. You tell me what you think of what I say.
Okay.
Jordan Raanan is a bit of a pot stirrer. He likes to stir the pot. What is your opinion? What is your thought on that statement?
They haven't been good. They've been a bad team for quite a while. Like, I report what I hear from the locker room most of the time and from people that are close to the team. Like, when you're bad, you're going to hear bad stuff. So what I've been 2013 to now, 2 winning seasons. So that's what, 10 out of 12 years have been bad.
Right.
You're going to hear a lot more negative. So, and also, I will say this, and I noticed this because my friends, I told you before, they love to send me stuff from your site
Right.
when people rip on me, because they think it's hilarious, like some of the things that people say about me. Not that they disagree, but they just, they actually pile on.
Right.
They're like, oh,
They're ribbing you.
friends.
you're a
They're ribbing you,
pompous
yeah.
a-hole. Yep, that sounds about right. And then they all start making jokes. Like, they love that part of it. So you do see a difference when you go to ESPN. It puts a target on your back a little bit. Like, I don't care what anybody says. It's just the way it is. More attention's put on you, and my job is different. It is different now than it is when I'm working locally and doing like, I'm not asked to write a story every day of the week. I'm looked to do bigger picture to attract the bigger fan, right?
Sure.
A Giant fan who may be living in San Diego, or the general football fan who may be living in San Diego. Like, if I write about the third string tight end, they're not going to care about who the third string tight end is, right? So you have to sort of cater your coverage and change it in a little different. So,
well, when you started covering the Giants, you weren't with ESPN, right? You were, was it NJ.com?
I was the first NJ.com Giants reporter.
Right, that's what I thought.
The NJ.com Star Ledger, when it was kind of just first going digital. And so it was a way different job. My job was very different.
Very
And
different.
at that point, especially with the boss I had too, like, yeah, I had showed up and my boss immediately, like within the first week, was making me ask Tom Coughlin, are you contemplating, you know, retiring after the season? And like the last thing Tom Coughlin in the world ever wanted to talk about was retiring. He's like, never wanted to retire. And
Right.
so, you know, like that was part of the job then. So yeah, for sure.
So your
I wouldn't
job
disagree
really.
with the assessment you made originally, though, and to some degree. Like, you know, if things are going wrong, I'm not going to be afraid to bring it up,
Sure.
whereas some
Yeah,
people might.
and I've noticed that over the years, not just with the NJ.com, but with ESPN, your role has changed. So when you first went to ESPN, it seemed like there was a lot more written content, and now it's evolved as media has evolved. Your role has changed too.
Yeah,
So
it could be. You know, we always go back and forth. There's more is, you know, more is more, now it's more, less is more. You know, it just always seems to change just depending on, you know, what our goal is as an organization. But we got to remember, we have 32 beat reporters.
right,
Okay, if everyone writes a story every day, they're going to get lost on our website,
right,
Right.
right? And
right.
therefore, your stuff is not going to get read, and it's going to be a challenge to have it in a a good spot on the site, right? Like
Sure.
there's all these challenges you have at ESPN that are different that maybe other people have to deal with.
And plus,
So
people don't read as much too. So
yeah,
that's
this
just
is
the way society is now too. So
It's the way we are.
yeah,
so with some of that in mind, right? So then the opposite of that, what not really directed at you, but the media folks in general, the you guys who cover the Giants, you're asking questions. You'll get the part, well, why didn't you just keep grilling them even further? Help me understand, because I mean, I've done not nearly to that level, but I've done things where where I had to ask guys questions like that. You get to a point where you know you've got your answer is your answer. You could keep pounding on them. They're not going to tell you anything different. Where's that line where you know, okay, I've kind of pushed this. I want to push it a little bit further. It might be key to do it, but maybe this is the time I don't do it. So where's that line? How do you know when and when not to do that?
It's kind of just like a feel thing. You got to be like, okay, how far can I push? Like, here's the thing, you know, most of the time you're sitting there and a lot of times you're getting stuff you know isn't true. Right.
Right.
That happens. I mean, when Dabo sat there and told us, you know, oh, Wink and I never fought over anything aside from a slice of pizza. And he said, then he used the donut analogy. Like, we knew that wasn't true, but you
or
can only
when
push.
they said Kadarius Toney wasn't going anywhere. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
Oh.
you'll push, but only to some degree. Like, you push sometimes because you're like, I don't want to just be fed BS all the time.
Right,
Sure.
You can't
Sure.
just give me garbage and expect me to eat it all the time.
right.
So sometimes you just, you know, reach a boiling point. You're like, I'm not just going to let you walk all over me and tell me what we know is not true. All right. Like, or like, you can't sit there and say, you know, and just not tell us that the guy's ankle is broken. You know, he's walking around in a cast on crutches. You can't just say, we'll see what happens. Like, no, like, you know,
Right.
so I think you kind of push it until like it's counterproductive at that point. You don't want it to become like, uh, you know, I was going to say a key match, you know, between the two of you.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to
You
say
don't want
that.
to be adversarial. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
you're not.
Yeah. A
You know
Ryan
you're
Leaf
not.
situation in the locker room.
You know you're
Yeah.
not going to get an answer from Brian Dable when he starts off saying, "I understand the question." You know that's
Yeah.
his
I mean,
favorite phrase.
so he does a good job of like wearing you down, though, to be
Yeah,
honest with you. It's just a matter sometimes of like when you just like had enough. Like, you can't just give us like 50 words on why Tommy DeVito was impressive to you against the Green Bay Packers. Like, come on, like say something nice about it. Like, we're just trying to write a story here. So like, you know, on those kind of things, you're more likely to keep pushing rather than to just like make a point. Like, I
right.
think that, you know, that's kind of what it is. A lot of times, so it's really weird, the whole press conference scenario and how they're all like broadcast now, because it's not really an event that's made to be broadcast, to be honest with
Right,
you.
right, right.
Like, the back and forth is sometimes not made to be, especially clipped out and put on its own without context. Like, it's a different scenario. It's not like a normal conversation you have with somebody, the way that the whole system is set up. So it could come off very weird in a clipped off social post or something. You know what I mean? And so
Especially if it's a Zoom call. If it's a Zoom call, it's very awkward.
yeah, Zoom calls are terrible because then
Yeah.
you can't follow up, and if you really want to push somebody, you can't really do it because it's not your turn to speak. So Zoom calls are especially weird, and there's sometimes very weird questions come at very weird times of Zoom calls. So
And
yeah,
in
that's part of the job though
the old
nowadays.
days, I think you were there when they did this, but maybe this predated you. That you didn't get these scheduled media availabilities with the players that they picked. So you would be able to back in the day, and I don't know, again, I don't know if you were there when they did this, but you could go to training camp and you could go to Pat Hanlon and say, I would like to talk to this player, and they'd make that player available just to you, so you could sit down with them and talk to that player. Now it seems to be all, we're going to roll out these 3 or 4 players, and those are the ones that you're going to talk to on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then
The Giants do a good job though. We do get, even in training camp, you can request certain
oh, good.
players on the side.
Nice.
Okay,
So you
great.
still get that, but it is much more organized. It's not like you just get to go to the locker room. It is like here's the guy that's going to talk, and uh, but I'm like when in those cases, like a lot of times when they have those, you know, press conferences in the locker room where it's like predetermined, and here's this guy, like I'll go off to the side and talk to other people in the locker room. Like I find it more productive. Like
Yeah.
especially nowadays, anybody can get you guys can get that on your site
Right.
before we even get out of the locker room,
Right.
like half the time. Like, so what am I getting that's unique? What I have used unique is I have access to players in the locker room and
Right.
people within the organization like that I can talk to off to the side. That's my advantage, right?
Mhm.
And I try to keep that in mind. Like I need to use that to my advantage. That's what I have. That's the value I can bring to the situation of to providing context for things is people are willing to talk to me on the side. Like, I might have a back and forth with Brian Dayball at a press conference, but then we'll talk off the side or we'll have a phone conversation later on about said topic and get the right context to it because you can only say certain things publicly.
So
People,
is
by
it
the way, that's a big thing. People think that Brian Dable hates me and that all the coaches hated me. I'll tell you this. I thought about it this week.
I was going to ask you
I've
that.
spoken. I've spoken to every former Giants coach that I covered in the last month.
Oh,
Everyone like
really?
McAdoo hated you. Every coach hates you. I still have a good relationship with every single one of them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Because it does seem at some time, some points in press conferences that they're almost like, "What is it now, Jordan?" It almost seems like that. But maybe
But
that's
it's like that's part of the job.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that's like okay. Uh, that's like going on the stage. We go back and forth,
Sure,
yeah.
and then
sure.
off to the side as we walk away. Especially Dayball, he'll like make a little comment to you, or like a lot of guys do that. Like that's just how it is. There's a difference between what we have to do when the lights are on, and your job is to ask tough questions, and then
Right.
what we say on the side as human beings.
Right.
Right. And they have got a lot to answer for, like you mentioned. It hasn't been pretty. It's been downright ugly. And your role isn't to sort of cover up for the mess. You've got to say, what are you doing? Basically, in a nutshell, what's going on and
Yeah.
how are you going to fix this? And that's your job. So hopefully they understand that. So
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that story like what went wrong this season, and uh, it started out with a story about how after they lost to Tampa Bay and everybody said they're soft, right? In the locker room, we played
Yeah.
soft, whatever it was. They were playing that Thursday on Thanksgiving, remember? And
Yep.
that Monday meeting was all positive clips. Like Dabo wanted to show them that their effort was fine, and it was perceived by some guys like, "What are we doing here?" You
right.
know. When I went to write that story, I went into the locker room. I probably talked to 25, 30 guys, mostly the top players on the team. And said, what do you think went wrong this season? And I originally started in my head, I had an idea of, I'll start probably with how everything went wrong in that Washington game and the kicker got injured and like it kind of all
Mm,
fell apart from there.
yeah.
And, most of the guys in the locker room were like, nah, injuries happen. They were able to brush that off. But then a whole bunch of guys, more than a handful of guys, brought up the Tampa Bay thing. And it wasn't even something I had even thought of, to be honest with you. And I was like, oh, I guess it did come off
A
wrong.
nerve.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it hit a nerve. Like, maybe that was. I'm sure that wasn't Brian Dable's intention to come off that way. But
Right.
sometimes perception is reality. And if they think it looked bad, then it is bad, right? That's the bottom line. So
Right.
that's kind of like how I come, like those things come to fruition, right? I go and I talk to as many people as I can that I know that I have access to, and then I take it and I use it. Like I had some of those things, but I'm not just gonna like the Nick McLeod story. I knew that, I heard that weeks before,
Right.
right? But it just on its own, it's on its own merit. It didn't, like, in a bigger picture in the story of like what went wrong in the season. Okay, that was like 30 graphs down. That was
Yeah.
one of the things that went wrong in the season. Guys looked at that like, hey, what are we doing here? Like, is
Right.
this how we're treating guys? So it fit there, and I had it, and I just sat on it until it fit. And if it
Sure.
didn't fit into the picture, I wouldn't use it. Also, it kind of reached
Right.
another locker room in the NFL. And at that point, I'm like, geez, okay, at some point, it's going to get out, right? Like, if it reached another locker room in the NFL, that
Right.
story is
Right.
going to get out some way, somehow now. This would be a good place for it in this story.
So
In the
I'm sorry. John.
No. It's I was gonna say I'm kind of changing slightly. So if you're still on that one topic, continue. If
Yeah.
not, I have something different. I'll go different. In this world, you're doing it right now. You have your own podcast. We're doing a podcast. Everybody has a podcast. How more complicated or difficult, and then we will wrap it up a little bit. We've kept you on. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
No,
we've
don't
kept
worry.
him
I'm
on
looking
a
at my
long
watch
time.
No,
because
I
I
get
drew. I'm
We've
looking
kept
at my
him.
watch because my garage is. I'm in a sitting room. Like, it's my office. Underneath is the garage. So I hear my daughter. The garage open, and I hear my daughter coming home from soccer. So I was just looking what time it was.
Well,
It's
we've
like
kept
pitch
you on a
black
long time.
outside. I don't know how they were practicing. So but no, they don't need me. Trust me. We can finish up here. We got
I
time.
got you. So with everybody, and now players all have their own. I mean, Micah Parsons is one that stands out to me a lot. Here's a guy, he's interviewing players from other teams in the middle of the week. I'm like, what the hell? What, like, what happened to the days of hating the other players during the season? Now it's like everybody's buddy. How much more complicated or more difficult does that make it for you to do your job when these guys are kind of almost, they got their own thing going now? And it's almost like, I don't want to answer your questions. I want to go out and I'm going to go ask or do my own presentation. What does it add to the complication to your job to get the players to talk to you?
I say the complicated part is there's people out there who are sycophants. Like, I'm not talking about people who cover the team regular even, but like there's people on the outside who will just bring these guys on and kiss their butt and everything's nice and rosy. And so it makes you look like a bad guy because you're not always nice and rosy. You don't
Right.
only always bring up the positives. I have to stand there in the locker room and be the guy who asks them, why did you suck today?
Right.
In so many words. Like, that's what the job is. Like, literally, they know when they play bad, and you have to go in there and say, why did you play bad?
Right.
And so there are people out there whose job is totally different, but they can just kiss their butt. They don't ever have to ask a tough, hard question. So these guys then are under the impression, like, why are you guys so negative? Like,
Right.
like, why can't you be like this outside guy who covers the team and but as like a fan, right? And like,
Right.
or whatever. Or we
Right.
can just go and present only the things we want to present, the positives. We don't have to sit here and talk about all the negatives. So it makes the job a lot harder. But that's just the environment and the world that we live in.
Right.
I don't begrudge anybody for it. Their job is different than my job. It just makes, for me personally, and I'm a me guy in that. What I'm worried, and I think everybody operates like this, even if you don't admit it. You're worried about how does it affect me?
Sure.
And it does. It affects me that everybody has a podcast. They could have their own podcast. They could, make their points in any social post or any way they want at any time. Now, I've never seen a regime try to control the narrative more than this current regime. So they're on very strict orders, like, of things that they can say and publicly, and it's definitely something that catches your attention. And they can't just. That's why I would be like, I can't imagine Shador Sanders coming and having a podcast
Right.
and just talking about inside business. Like, I don't know how that. I can't see that playing with Joe Shane and Brian Dable. I just can't.
I would imagine the Giants basically lay down the law with the new players about what's allowed on social media, because you don't see Now they've had some incidents, like Xavier McKinney saying some things they didn't want him to say, but it seems like that they can, like you just said, they seem to control that more than other teams. So they must lay down the law, I would assume.
Brian Dable in particular, they're very concerned about what the message is publicly from them and the players, like way more than I think I've seen even from the past regimes here. But times keep changing, so you have to keep evolving too. I get it to some degree. There's just it's too easy for guys to just pop off, right? It's just right there at their fingertips. Like you'd be surprised at how many guys literally come into the locker room after game or practice and search their own name. And so like they play a game and search their name. You guys are on social media during games. Could you imagine what they're saying about these guys during games? People are saying ridiculous things about them.
Oh yeah.
I can't imagine searching your own name. I see my social media like when something used to happen with Eric Flowers for years, even after the whole thing with me and Eric Flowers went down, my social media would light up like stupid stuff all over the place about me out of nowhere. Like I can't imagine searching my name. I really can't.
Or like we were talking earlier, Evan Neal. So I don't excuse him for going off. He
flipping burgers,
flipping burgers comment, but you can understand the level of frustration if he's doing what you just said, and every single comment about him is just awful. The frustration level would build up. So if I were a player, it's easy for me to say this, I would just stay clear of that because there's nothing good can come out of that. But even back in the old days of BBI, when we were first set up and back in the 90s, we had players come up to us all the time at training camp and say, yeah, we check out the site, and I would cringe sometimes because some of them were players I knew that weren't treated very well on the site. And again, you mentioned that earlier with you. It's the same.
Right.
You run into people every now and then, and you're like, I try to tell them, look, BBI is not a monolith. There are all kinds of people out there, and there are thousands of people, and they have different opinions, and some of them are not good. So
Everybody says they don't pay attention, but we know everybody pays attention.
Yeah.
Like
right.
They're like, oh, I don't pay attention at all. Then we know when you say that means you pay attention. Like everyone to some degree pays attention. It's impossible to completely shut it out. But I agree with you. I would try my hardest. Like I used to be on your site more.
All right.
It's become harder for me to go on. Like I do go on every once in a while. I'm not gonna say I don't, but definitely with way less frequency than I did 8 years ago or whatever.
And I don't blame you, and I don't.
I'd be like, I want to respond when I see some of these things that my friends send me, but I'm like, I can't. You just got to ignore it, let it slide, go on to the next one.
Right.
Like,
and you got to remember,
don't go to defend yourself.
And remember too, just for you, Jordan, it's this, and I think you and I talked about this originally back in 2013 when you were new to the beat. People will shoot the messenger. So it's again, the Giants have been bad for a long time, and if you're truth telling, and I've run into this when I criticize the team, there are some fans, a sizable number of them, that any criticism of the team they don't take well, and they'll come after the messenger in that case. So just be aware. I'm sure you're aware of that.
I understand what my job is. I mean, I'm pretty good at ignoring stuff. I always tell people I ignore 99 out of every 100 nasty negative social posts or comment towards me.
Right.
That once a year that I slip up.
I'm out.
And I get myself in trouble, and then I have to go backtrack afterwards. And I like 99 out of 100 is a really good percentage.
Yes, but it's that one.
But you really should be 100. And
that's hard though. That's hard.
I'll get texts from people like every once in a while when I say something. Like Garofalo used to text me like, you probably shouldn't say that, like, and I'm like, I know. Like,
well, the guy who keeps getting into it with the fans on Twitter now is Art. You got to tell Art to stop. He's getting into these fights with people left and right. I have just one.
He tweets too much for me. That's all I got.
He does a lot. He is a lot.
I'm a less is more. He's a more is more.
Yes, he is.
Like we have very different approaches to that portion of the job.
Well, I'm like, Art, you better just stop at this point. I just have one more question because I know we've kept on way too long. This is a question that has come up, and I just wanted to get your opinion on whether it's BS or
Sure.
you have noticed it. There's a perception that the Giants have tightened the loose lips sink ships. They're, you that what they're going to do in the draft. It's harder to decipher what they're doing now than it was maybe 5, 6 years, 7 years ago. That they've sort of there's a lot of misinformation there. It seems to be out there. Have you picked that up, or do you think that's BS that they've tightened things up, or not?
I think that's BS a little
Okay.
bit. I mean, I
Okay.
picked the last three drafts of who they were going to draft. Like, I think, you know, like I had neighbors, so could easily pick JJ McCarthy. I had Deontay Banks. Wasn't an accident that I had Deontay Banks.
Hmm.
So like if you follow the right people and like, but nowadays I think what's happened is there's so many people out. Like there's people that are putting stuff out that I even see. I went on the site today and I saw you
All
put
right.
somebody on there. I don't even know if that's a real person.
I don't know.
You know
I
what I mean?
know. I
Like
know.
there's these draft accounts that have been around forever, and
Yeah.
you're like, I never met that guy. Like, I wonder if that's a real person. Like there are
Chad
accounts like that.
Forbes, is that what you're talking about? The Chad Forbes one? Is that, yeah.
Is he a real person? Do
I
you know
don't know.
him?
I don't know.
So actually, I went and started searching it. So Chad Forms did a whole bunch of radio interviews. So, but when I go click on and when I I just Googled it, and when I
Right.
went to look because I was like, is he a real person? I really don't know. Like all these years, like I don't know if Chad Forbes is a real person.
Right.
He did radio interviews, but every time he does a radio interview, even when it's like a video, he's always just audio, never video. Everyone that I
Mhm.
saw, and I'm like, what? So like I don't know. Like I don't know who that is.
He's
Like there's a
AI.
there's a couple sites out there. Like
Slick
there's
Rick.
not even that. Like we know Slick Rick is not a real person, right? He has what a dog as his avatar. Like there's a real person behind it, but like
He's got a
he
following.
he doesn't pretend to be like a real like draft like work for like some draft site or whatever and
No, yeah,
like yeah he's pretty honest with what his account is,
yeah,
but there's other ones out there like I sometimes see things and I'm like, is this a real, you don't know, there's so many like bogus
yeah.
semi real or like you know people out there that do it on their own maybe and they don't work for an outlet like it's impossible, so all this stuff is out there and I think people are throwing stuff left and right. And you
Right,
just, for what I do, you have to trust who you speak to and who you
right.
know and just stick to it and try not to be influenced from the outside. And that's what I feel like I try and do. It's tough, by the way. But
Do you get frustrated that when somebody reports something that you supposedly said on one of your podcasts and it's not really what you said? So maybe you'll see a tweet and says Jordan Raanan said X, and you're like, wait a minute, I never said that. Has that ever
yeah,
happened? Yeah.
that happens all the time now.
Okay.
It's very interesting. Yeah, that kind of gets you in trouble too. So it's kind of
Yeah.
very weird.
Yeah.
But that's just the way of the world. Yeah, honestly, you have to come to grips with you can't stop that these
Right.
days.
Yeah,
I
Right.
mean, it really is the case. I mean, I like your site. I mean, but it happens on your site all the time. Like people
No.
just pull out one thing I
No.
say and post it as like a headline, right?
Right.
And
right.
like, holy, I'm like, whoa. I mean, there was a lot more context to it than just that.
Right.
Like,
Well,
but I don't know. Like, you have to just be that much more careful with your words. So it makes it. I usually try to be very careful with the way I word things
right.
for
Right.
that purpose. Like,
You don't want to get
because it
you
could
don't want to get a
backfire.
text from Pat
Yeah.
Hamlin saying fix this. You know, so
Late on
Yeah.
late on a Friday night when he's on
Yeah.
a tirade. It's like,
I've been in
Yeah.
that seat before. So
No, to me, it's more. To me, it's more. Uh, Especially with players. Like I don't want stuff getting back to players that I
oh
said
yeah,
about them that I didn't say that I
right,
didn't really say in the first. You know what I mean?
right,
right,
For
yeah.
right,
me,
right.
That'd
that
be terrible.
that
Yeah,
that gets me in trouble. That ruins my credibility in the locker room.
locker room. Yeah,
And so that is what I try to protect against the most,
yeah,
right? Like I try to be honest with players. Like I usually have a conversation with them. Like, listen, I'm not gonna I, my, and I try to be upfront with them. Like, this is who I am. Like certain people, won't ask you the tough questions. I'm going to ask you the tough questions when you play poorly. I'm going to have to write you play poorly. When you play well, I'm going to write when you play well. And I try to lay that out to them originally. Like, if you have a problem with something I said, come to me and we'll talk about it, you know? And
Right.
so I try to lay that out like this. Yeah, I'm going to be try to be completely transparent with you. I'm not, if I'm going to write something about you, I'm not going to sniper you from a distance. I'm going to ask you about it. That's why I'm asking you tough questions. I don't want to write something about how you played poorly and this and that and not have the guts to ask you to provide context to that.
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna have
It doesn't always work with everybody. You get along with certain people. Certain people don't like you. It's part of the job. Certain people get it. Certain people you have a better relationship with.
Right.
That's, certain people get mad at me. They don't talk to me for a while. That's just part of, if that doesn't happen to you, you're not doing the job
Your
right.
job.
Like
Yeah.
that, just part of the deal.
If we ever get to interview Deontay Banks, I'm gonna have a whole lot to answer for. So that's not gonna
Hit you harder, John.
That's not gonna go well.
That's the other part of it is there's so many people out there that are just, saying whatever they want and they don't have to go to the locker room.
Right.
You don't have to go to the locker room. It's not your job.
Right.
But Deontay Banks doesn't even know which people are the ones in the locker room. I'm not saying him personally, but guys like
Sure,
a lot of guys are like that. It's hard to decipher which people are the ones that are in the mainstream media that are coming in the locker room every day or every week or whatever, and which ones are doing a podcast that they don't come in the locker room.
Right.
Like think about it. If you're these guys, there's so many people. It's hard to differentiate which people come into the locker room all the time. Like they know a handful of us, but it takes time to do that. But they just assume, oh, this guy's in the media, he's killing me, and then they could be blaming us for something you said.
Right. So see, Jordan, that's your out. You just go, he did it.
Yeah. It's John's fault. This guy John from BBI. Yeah, he doesn't come into the locker room and have to deal with it.
Well, if he ever brings up a question about, did you say something about the Wizard of Oz? That was definitely me. So anyway,
okay. I'll bring it up. Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So real quick, and we're gonna let you go because you've been on for a while. What you think for sure, kind of like, I think this probably is going to happen in draft at 3. If you can kind of say, what do you think is going to happen at 3? And then do you think that they will move back into 1? Do you think we're going to be picking twice in the first round?
I think there's a good chance they're picking twice in first round. I mean, my guess would be Abdul Carter and one of the quarterbacks. I don't know how the quarterbacks play out. It's hard to pick who you're going to draft at 28 or 29 or whatever. Maybe like you're really just throwing darts at that point. Hey, look at that. Darts. There you go.
Nice.
Wordplay.
Oh, nice. I don't want to mill roll the conversation, but
there you go.
So
I do think that here's positions they're going to look at. Ready? Defensive line, obviously.
Right.
Interior offensive line. I could see them round 2, 3, day 2, getting a guy at either of those 2 positions that could be starting year 1. A wide type tight end, a physical running back. They looked into a physical running back in free agency, I know. And look at the profile of the running backs they brought in. They all fit that profile.
Yeah.
A kicker. Don't be surprised if they take a kicker later on.
Wow.
I've heard of that. I said tight end, right? Yeah, cornerback's another position. So basically, they have a lot of positions that they could take. But these are the positions I would expect them to go at a lot of those spots. So I mean that's kind of what I'm expecting from this draft. You can make an argument the Giants can use a player at every single position. Like there's not a position that they could take a guy where I'm like, they don't need a guy at that position. Like, can make an argument for every single position.
Sure.
Right. Well, with that, Jordan, first off, tell everybody where they can find your podcast, find all your work, all that good stuff. I'll do it all in the description, but let everybody know, and then I'm going to let you get out of here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys. Jordan Raanan on X, at Jordan Raanan on ESPN, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. I don't even know. Whatever else. And Breaking Big Blue each week. Try to do an episode each week. What I can give that's different is I try to provide little nuggets of things that I hear along the way, sprinkle them in throughout there. I feel like I said before, that's my advantage. Try and use it. Like that's what I try and stress. Like I can provide that. Now there's times of the year where there is nothing going on.
Right.
So it might, you're not going to get that in the middle of the spring very often.
Right.
But I think there's times of the year where you go to Breaking Big Blue and you'll find a lot of that good stuff there.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, again, thank you, Jordan. And, I'm just going to wrap it up here. We've been on for a while. We've got a busy week. I know you've got a busy week. So thanks, Jordan, again for being
Thank
on.
you very much.
For everybody else, like, subscribe, all that
You
good
got it, guys.
stuff. We're going to call it an end, and we'll catch you again real soon.